The notification sound pierced through the quiet December evening like a knife. Sarah Chen-Williams looked down at her phone, expecting maybe a work email or a friend's dinner plans. Instead, she found a text message that would shatter her world and ignite a fire within her that she never knew existed. The message was from her own mother, and it contained just 12 words that would change everything. Tyler is too much work. Don't bring him to Christmas dinner. At 28 years old, Sarah thought she had navigated the hardest parts of young motherhood. She was wrong. This was about to become her defining moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Chen-Williams had always been the peacekeeper in her family. Growing up in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, she was the middle child who smoothed over arguments, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, and the daughter who called her parents every Sunday without fail. Even her hyphenated last name told a story of compromise. She'd kept both her maiden name, Chen, and her ex-husband's surname, Williams, after their divorce, mainly because 4-year-old Tyler was used to hearing Williams at preschool. Her small apartment in the Highlands neighborhood wasn't much to look at from the outside. A converted Victorian duplex with peeling paint and a front porch that creaked under the weight of Denver's harsh winters. But inside, Sarah had created something magical. The living room walls were covered with Tyler's artwork, a rainbow explosion of finger paintings, crayon masterpieces, and construction paper collages. In one corner sat a sensory tent filled with weighted blankets and soft lights, where Tyler could retreat when the world became too overwhelming. The refrigerator hummed with the weight of visual schedules, communication cards, and therapy appointment reminders held up by cheerful magnets. This was their sanctuary, carefully crafted over 2 years since Tyler's autism diagnosis. Every corner of their home had been thoughtfully arranged to support his needs while still feeling warm and lived in. The transition strips between rooms weren't just functional. Sarah had found ones with colorful patterns that Tyler loved to trace with his fingers. The noise-canceling headphones hung on a hook painted like a tree branch, turning a necessity into decor. Sarah worked as a customer service representative for a renewable energy company downtown. A job that paid the bills, but didn't exactly fulfill her dreams of becoming a teacher. Those dreams had been put on hold when Tyler's needs became apparent, when the costs of occupational therapy, speech therapy, and specialized preschool programs began consuming most of her paycheck. She didn't mind the sacrifice. Watching Tyler's face light up when he finally mastered a new skill was worth more than any career advancement. But the isolation was harder than she'd expected. Many of her college friends had drifted away after Tyler's diagnosis, not out of cruelty, but out of simple discomfort. They didn't know how to interact with a child who sometimes covered his ears and rocked when restaurants got too loud, or who might have a meltdown if plans changed unexpectedly. Their coffee dates became rare, then non-existent. Their group chats continued without her, filled with complaints about work presentations and dating apps, problems that seemed wonderfully simple compared to fighting insurance companies for therapy coverage. Tyler was a beautiful child with his father's dark hair and Sarah's determined chin. His eyes, a striking hazel that shifted between green and brown depending on the light, held an intelligence that often surprised adults who expected less from him. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of trains, could recite the entire Denver Light rail schedule from memory, and had recently become fascinated with holiday traditions from different cultures. His latest fixation was explaining to anyone who would listen the difference between Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, and winter solstice celebrations. The communication challenges were real. Tyler was largely non-speaking, relying on a combination of sign language, picture cards, and his tablet device to express his needs and thoughts. But Sarah had learned to read his subtle cues, the way his stimming patterns changed when he was excited versus anxious, how his posture shifted when he was processing too much sensory input. They had their own language, built over countless hours of patience, observation, and unconditional love. Sarah's family had initially rallied around Tyler's diagnosis. Her mother, Patricia Martinez, had driven up from Colorado Springs the day after they received the official evaluation results, armed with casseroles and promises of support. Her older brother Marcus had researched autism extensively, sending Sarah articles and book recommendations. Her younger sister Jessica had even changed her college major to special education, inspired by her nephew's journey. But as the novelty wore off and the reality of Tyler's needs became apparent, that initial enthusiasm began to wane. Family gatherings became increasingly stressful as relatives struggled to accommodate Tyler's sensory sensitivities and communication differences. The loud, chaotic Martinez family gatherings that Sarah had grown up loving, with multiple conversations happening simultaneously, children running between rooms, and the constant clatter of dishes and laughter, were overwhelming for Tyler. Sarah found herself constantly apologizing, constantly explaining, constantly mediating between her son's needs and her family's expectations. She brought noise-canceling headphones to every gathering, packed sensory toys and snacks, and always had an exit strategy ready. Sometimes it worked beautifully. Tyler would charm everyone with his train knowledge or his careful, methodical way of organizing the holiday decorations. Other times, the sensory overload would trigger a meltdown, and Sarah would spend the rest of the visit feeling like she was walking on eggshells.
The previous Thanksgiving had been particularly challenging. Tyler had been excited about the holiday for weeks, practicing the social stories Sarah had created about turkey dinner and family traditions. But her cousin's new boyfriend had arrived with a booming voice and overpowering cologne, immediately triggering Tyler's sensory sensitivities. When Tyler began rocking and covering his ears, the boyfriend had made a joke about training him better. The comment had hung in the air like smoke, with family members unsure whether to laugh or object. Sarah had handled it with her usual diplomatic grace, gently explaining Tyler's sensory processing differences while removing him from the situation. But inside, she had felt a familiar ache, the exhaustion of constantly educating, constantly advocating, constantly protecting her son from a world that nurse who had worked in pediatrics for 30 years, she wasn't oblivious to children's needs. But Patricia was also a woman who valued smooth social interactions, who believed in not making a fuss, and who had grown up in an era when differences were minimized rather than accommodated. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, Sarah had sensed a shift in her mother's tone during their Sunday phone calls. The conversations that used to flow naturally now felt stilted, punctuated by awkward pauses when Tyler's name came up. Patricia asked fewer questions about his therapy progress and seemed to change the subject whenever Sarah mentioned his latest achievements. Sarah had attributed it to holiday stress. Patricia was hosting Christmas dinner for the entire extended family, all 15 relatives converging on her Colorado Springs home for the traditional feast. It was a lot of work, Sarah reasoned. Her mother was 72 and was still insisting on cooking everything from scratch, from the prime rib to the homemade dinner rolls to the 3 different desserts. The text message arrived on December 20th, just 5 days before Christmas, as Sarah was helping Tyler practice his holiday social stories one more time. They had been working on the sequence of events, arriving at Grandma's house, hanging up coats, greeting relatives with words or waves, finding the quiet room if needed. Tyler had been particularly excited because Sarah had promised he could bring his new train book to show his Uncle Marcus. The phone buzzed, and Sarah glanced at it absent-mindedly while Tyler carefully arranged his picture cards in order. Her mother's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah smiled reflexively. Maybe Patricia was calling to confirm what time they should arrive or to ask if Tyler had any new dietary restrictions. Instead, she found 12 words that felt like a physical blow. Tyler is too much work. Don't bring him to Christmas dinner.
Sarah stared at the screen, reading the message 3 times before her brain could fully process what she was seeing. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a poorly worded text sent in haste. This was a deliberate exclusion of her 4-year-old son from the family Christmas celebration. Across the room, Tyler continued organizing his cards, humming a soft tune under his breath, a self-soothing behavior that Sarah usually found comforting. Now, watching her beautiful, innocent child, who had been practicing for weeks to be ready for this family gathering, Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, the cheerful holiday decorations they had put up together now seeming to mock the reality of their situation. Tyler's carefully made Christmas list was still stuck to the refrigerator, written in his precise 4-year-old handwriting with Sarah's help. Trains, books, hugs from family. Sarah set down her phone with trembling hands and looked at her son, who was completely unaware that his grandmother, the woman who had sung him lullabies and taught him to make paper snowflakes, had just decided he was too much trouble to include in their family celebration. In that moment, Sarah Chen-Williams realized that her role as the family peacekeeper was about to end. Her role as Tyler's fierce protector was just beginning.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Sarah's first instinct was to call immediately. Her thumb hovered over Patricia's contact information for several long minutes, her mind racing through a dozen different ways to start that conversation. But something held her back. Maybe it was the clinical coldness of those 12 words. Or maybe it was the growing realization that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. Her mother had thought about this, had deliberated, and had chosen to send a text message rather than have a conversation. Instead, Sarah walked to her bedroom and closed the door softly behind her. She needed space to process what had just happened, away from Tyler's innocent presence in the living room. The bedroom was small and cluttered with the remnants of her former life. Wedding photos she hadn't gotten around to packing away, textbooks from her abandoned teaching degree, a jewelry box that no longer held an engagement ring. But it was quiet, and right now, quiet was what she needed. Sarah sat on the edge of her bed and read the message again, analyzing each word like she was decoding a foreign language. Tyler is too much work. Not, I'm worried about managing the dinner. Not, maybe we could find a way to make it easier. But a definitive judgment that her 4-year-old son was a burden too heavy to bear. The casual dismissal felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than her divorce had. Her phone buzzed with another message from Patricia. I know you're upset, but think about the other children. They deserve to enjoy Christmas too. The implication hit Sarah like cold water. Her mother was suggesting that Tyler's presence would somehow ruin Christmas for his cousins, children who had played with him, laughed with him, and never once complained about his differences. She thought about 8-year-old Sophia, Marcus's daughter, who had patiently taught Tyler how to string popcorn for the tree last year, or 6-year-old Danny, Jessica's son, who always made sure Tyler got the first choice of Christmas cookies because he knew Tyler preferred the star-shaped ones. A third message appeared. Maybe you could visit the next day, after the big dinner. Just you. Just you. Not you and Tyler, just Sarah, as if she were a person who could be separated from her child, as if her identity as Tyler's mother was something she could leave at the door like a coat. Sarah felt her chest tighten with an emotion she rarely allowed herself to experience. Anger. Real, burning anger at the injustice of it all. She had spent 2 years being understanding, accommodating, and apologetic. She had researched restaurants with quiet corners before family dinners, brought backup sensory toys to every gathering, and gracefully handled every stare, every inappropriate comment, every well-meaning but hurtful suggestion about what Tyler needed to learn or overcome. She had been the perfect autism parent, patient, educated, advocacy-minded but never pushy. She had read every book, attended every workshop, and connected with other parents in online support groups. She had learned to speak in therapy terms and IEP language to translate Tyler's needs into words that neurotypical people could understand and accept. But apparently, it wasn't enough. Despite all her efforts to make Tyler's presence easier for others, her own mother had decided he was simply too much work to include. Her phone rang with Patricia's name flashing on the screen. This time, Sarah answered on the second ring. "Mom?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Oh, good, you got my messages. I was worried you might be mad." "I am mad." The honesty surprised them both. "Sarah, honey, please be reasonable. You know how Tyler gets at big gatherings. Remember Thanksgiving? That poor boy was so overwhelmed and you were stressed the entire time trying to manage everything. This way you can actually enjoy what, Mom? Enjoy Christmas dinner while my son sits at home wondering why his family doesn't want him there? He's 4, Sarah. He won't really understand. He understands more than you think." Sarah's voice was rising, and she forced herself to lower it. Tyler has excellent hearing and might pick up on her distress. "He's been practicing his greetings for weeks. He made you a Christmas ornament and occupational therapy." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Patricia spoke, and her voice had lost its careful cheerfulness. "This isn't just about me, Sarah. Your Aunt Carol mentioned that her new granddaughter might be frightened if Tyler has one of his episodes, and you know how Uncle Roberto feels about accommodations." Uncle Roberto, who still used outdated terms and thought discipline could cure autism. Aunt Carol, who had once suggested that Tyler might be faking it for attention. Sarah felt her anger crystallizing into something sharper and more focused. "So you're willing to exclude your grandson to make everyone else comfortable?" "I'm trying to make Christmas pleasant for everyone. That includes Tyler. You said yourself that big groups are hard for him." "Hard for him doesn't mean impossible for him. It means we plan better and support him more. It means his family shows up for him even when it's not convenient." Patricia's voice took on an edge that Sarah recognized from her childhood, the tone that meant the conversation was over, whether Sarah agreed or not. "I've made my decision, Sarah. I'm sorry if it hurts your feelings, but I have to think about everyone."
Everyone except Tyler. Tyler has special needs. He needs special handling. Maybe it's better if special needs don't make him less family, Mom. The line went quiet again, and when Patricia spoke, her words carried a finality that made Sarah's stomach drop. "This is hard enough without you making it harder. I'll see you the day after Christmas if you want to visit. Alone." The call ended with a soft click that felt like a door closing. Sarah stared at her phone, her hands shaking slightly. In the living room, she could hear Tyler making soft train noises as he played, a happy, content sound that had become the soundtrack of their daily life. He was probably arranging his wooden trains by color or size, lost in his own peaceful world, completely unaware that his grandmother had just written him out of the Christmas family story. For a moment, Sarah considered giving in. It would be easier to accept the invitation for December 26th, to show up alone and pretend that nothing had happened. She could make excuses to Tyler about why they weren't going to Grandma's house on Christmas Day. Maybe say they had their own special celebration planned, or that Grandma was sick, or that there had been a misunderstanding about dates. It would preserve the peace, maintain the relationships, and avoid the confrontation that her family peacekeeper instincts were screaming at her to avoid. But as she sat there in the quiet of her bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of choices she had made to keep everyone else comfortable, Sarah realized that she was tired of being understanding. She was tired of making excuses for other people's inability to love her son unconditionally.
She was tired of accepting almost good enough when it came to Tyler's place in the world. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother Marcus. "Mom told me about Christmas. I tried to talk to her, but you know how she gets. I'm sorry, sis." Then Jessica. "This is so unfair. Danny keeps asking when he gets to show Tyler his new toy trains. I don't know what to tell him." Even the extended family was texting. Cousin Alina. "Heard about the situation. For what it's worth, Miguel loves playing with Tyler. This isn't right." Sarah realized that her mother's decision wasn't universally supported. The family Patricia claimed to be protecting actually wanted him there. The children who supposedly needed protection from Tyler were asking for him. The only people who seemed to think Tyler was too much work were Patricia herself and the handful of relatives who'd never bothered to get to know him beyond his diagnosis. Something shifted inside Sarah as she read those messages of support. Maybe she had been approaching this all wrong. Maybe instead of constantly trying to make Tyler fit into spaces that barely tolerated him, she should be creating spaces where he was genuinely welcome. Maybe instead of accepting crumbs of inclusion, she should be demanding the full feast of belonging that every child deserved. Tyler's laughter drifted through the bedroom door, a sound so pure and joyful that it made Sarah's chest ache with love and protective fury. He deserved better than a family that saw him as a problem to be managed. He deserved better than a Christmas day spent excluded from the people who were supposed to love him unconditionally. Sarah opened her laptop and began typing a response that would change everything. Not to her mother. Patricia had made her position clear. Instead, Sarah began crafting a message to the family members who had reached out with support, to the cousins who wanted Tyler there, to the siblings who saw the injustice of the situation. If her mother wanted to exclude Tyler from Christmas, that's Patricia's choice to make. But Sarah was done accepting that choice quietly. She was done protecting people from the truth about their own prejudices. She was done being the peacekeeper when peace came at the cost of her son's dignity. As she typed, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose beyond simply surviving each day. This wasn't just about one Christmas dinner anymore. This was about Tyler's place in the world, about what kind of future she was creating for him, about what message she was sending to every other family facing similar exclusions. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for her decision. Sarah took a deep breath, thought about Tyler's excitement over his homemade ornament, and began to write the message that would either heal her family or break it apart forever. Either way, Tyler would know that his mother had fought for him. The message Sarah composed that evening would later be shared thousands of times across social media platforms, but in that moment, sitting at her cluttered desk with Tyler's bedtime routine playing out in the background, she was simply a mother trying to find the right words. The laptop screen glowed in the dim bedroom light as she crafted what would become known in their family as the email. She started with the family group chat that included her siblings, cousins, and several close family friends. Everyone except Patricia and the handful of relatives who had never fully embraced Tyler's place in the family. The message was careful, but clear, explaining the situation without attacking her mother directly, focusing instead on what kind of Christmas she wanted to create for Tyler. "I know Mom has decided that Tyler shouldn't come to Christmas dinner," she wrote. "I understand that managing a big family gathering is stressful, and I've always tried to make his presence as easy as possible. But I've realized that I've been approaching this backward. Instead of asking Tyler to fit into spaces that barely tolerate him, I want to create a space where he's genuinely celebrated." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, her phone was buzzing constantly with replies. Marcus called first, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, I had no idea Mom was planning this. Sophia's been talking about showing Tyler her new train set for weeks. She's going to be devastated if he's not there."
Jessica texted a long message about how Danny had been practicing writing Tyler's name in Christmas cards and how she'd been teaching him some basic sign language so he could communicate better with his cousin. "I can't believe Mom would do this," she wrote. "It's like she's forgotten who Tyler actually is." But the message that surprised Sarah most came from her father's sister, Aunt Maria, who rarely involved herself in family drama. "Mija, I've been watching this situation for months, and I need to tell you something. Your mother isn't acting alone. There's been talking behind your back, complaints about Tyler at family gatherings that you don't know about. Roberto and Carol have been pushing this for a while." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The exclusion wasn't a spontaneous decision born from holiday stress. It was the culmination of months of behind-the-scenes discussions about Tyler's disruptive behavior. Family members had been cataloging his perceived infractions, building a case against his inclusion while smiling to Sarah's face and accepting her homemade cookies at every gathering. Aunt Maria's next text was even more revealing. "Patricia showed me a list last week. Things like cried when Danny dropped the ornament and needed to leave dinner table 3 times. She's been documenting everything like he's a problem to be solved instead of a child to be loved." The next morning brought both unexpected support and painful revelations. Sarah's phone rang at 7 a.m. Her college roommate, Jennifer, now living in Seattle, had somehow heard about the situation through the family network. "Sarah, I just heard what happened. I'm angry. I can barely speak," Jennifer said without preamble. "I've been following Tyler's progress on your social media posts, and that kid is amazing. Remember when I visited last spring? He spent an hour showing me his train collection, and his knowledge was incredible. Any family that can't see what a gift he is doesn't deserve him." But Jennifer's call also brought troubling news. "I need to tell you something else. My mom ran into your Aunt Carol at the grocery store yesterday. Carol was bragging about how they finally convinced Patricia to set some boundaries about Tyler. She made it sound like they'd been working on this for months." The conspiracy went deeper than Sarah had imagined. This wasn't just her mother making a difficult decision about Christmas logistics. It was a coordinated campaign by several family members who had apparently decided that Tyler's autism made him too challenging to include in family gatherings. Family members had been cataloging his perceived infractions, building a case against his inclusion while smiling to Sarah's face and accepting her homemade cookies at every gathering. But the revelation that broke Sarah's heart came from her cousin Elena, who called in tears. "Sarah, I need to apologize. At Thanksgiving, after you left, Patricia asked all of us if we thought Tyler's behavior was getting worse. She framed it like she was concerned about his development, like maybe the family gatherings were too stimulating for him. A few people said maybe smaller gatherings would be better for him." Elena's voice cracked. "I didn't realize she was building a case to exclude him. I thought she genuinely wanted to help. I even suggested maybe doing a quieter celebration, thinking it would be better for Tyler. I never imagined she would use that as justification to uninvite him." Sarah realized that even the family members who loved Tyler had been manipulated into providing ammunition for his exclusion. Their genuine concerns for his comfort had been twisted into evidence that he didn't belong at family celebrations.
The morning's revelations left Sarah reeling, but they also crystallized her resolve. This wasn't just about Christmas dinner anymore. It was about Tyler's fundamental right to belong in his own family. If she didn't take a stand now, this precedent would follow him for the rest of his life. Every birthday party, every wedding, every family milestone would come with the implicit question of whether Tyler's presence was worth the extra work. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She called in sick to work and spent the day researching, planning, and preparing for what she was already thinking of as Tyler's Christmas campaign. She reached out to the Regional Autism Advocacy Organization, not for advice on managing Tyler's behavior, but for guidance on how to educate families about inclusion and acceptance. The coordinator, a woman named Dr. Rebecca Santos, listened to Sarah's story with growing indignation.
I'm so sorry you're dealing with this, Dr. Santos said. Unfortunately, family exclusion is one of the most common issues we hear about. The sad truth is that many families struggle to move beyond seeing autism as a collection of deficits rather than recognizing the whole child. Dr. Santos offered to provide Sarah with educational resources about autism and inclusion, but she also made a suggestion that surprised Sarah. Have you considered hosting your own Christmas celebration? Sometimes the most powerful response to exclusion is creating an alternative that demonstrates real inclusion. Show your family what a celebration looks like when everyone is genuinely welcome. The idea had been germinating in Sarah's mind since the previous evening, but hearing it articulated by a professional made it feel possible rather than just wishful thinking. What if she organized a Christmas gathering that put Tyler at the center, instead of treating him as an accommodation? What if she invited all the family members who had expressed support, plus some of Tyler's therapy team and the other autism families they'd met through support groups? But the obstacles were immediate and daunting. Sarah's apartment was tiny, barely enough space for her and Tyler, let alone a holiday gathering. She had no experience organizing large events. Her budget was already stretched thin with Tyler's therapy costs and the extra expenses that came with single parenthood. More challenging than the logistical hurdles were the emotional ones. Every family tradition Sarah cherished was tied to her mother's house. The specific way Patricia arranged the Christmas tree, the recipes passed down through generations, the familiar rhythm of arrival times and seating arrangements. Creating an alternative celebration meant abandoning those traditions and risking the permanent fracture of relationships she'd spent her entire life nurturing. When Sarah picked Tyler up from preschool that afternoon, his teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, pulled her aside. "Tyler seems a little unsettled today. He's been asking about Christmas and Grandma more than usual. Has something changed with your holiday plans?" Sarah realized that Tyler was picking up on the tension in their home, even though she tried to shield him from the family drama. His routine had been disrupted by her phone calls and emotional conversations. His careful preparations for Christmas at Grandma's house were now causing him anxiety because he could sense something was wrong. That evening, as Sarah helped Tyler with his bedtime routine, he signed a question that broke her heart. "Grandma's sick? No Christmas?" Sarah knelt down to Tyler's eye level, choosing her words carefully. "Grandma isn't sick, buddy. There's been a change in plans for Christmas, but we're going to have a wonderful celebration, maybe even better than before." Tyler processed this information with his usual thoughtful intensity. "Different Christmas? Still family?" "Yes, still family. The people who love you most will be there." Tyler nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Bring train ornament?" "Absolutely. We'll bring your train ornament." As Sarah tucked Tyler into bed, surrounded by his carefully arranged stuffed animals and the gentle hum of his white noise machine, she made a silent promise. Tyler would have a Christmas filled with people who celebrated rather than tolerated him, even if it meant burning bridges with her extended family, even if it meant starting over with new traditions, even if it meant admitting that the family she'd worked so hard to keep together was already broken. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time since receiving that devastating text message, Sarah felt hopeful instead of helpless. Tyler deserved a family that saw his autism as just one part of who he was, not as a problem to be managed or overcome. If her birth family couldn't provide that, she would create a chosen family that could. The question now wasn't whether Tyler belonged, it was whether the people in their lives were worthy of belonging to Tyler's world.
The community center in Sarah's neighborhood had seen better days. The linoleum floors were scuffed from decades of use, the fluorescent lights hummed with an electrical buzz that made Tyler cover his ears during their initial walkthrough, and the holiday decorations looked like they'd been stored in someone's basement since 1987. But it was available on Christmas Day, affordable on Sarah's tight budget, and most importantly, it was theirs to shape however they needed. Sarah stood in the empty multipurpose room 3 days after her conversation with Dr. Santos, measuring spaces and envisioning possibilities. Tyler explored the room methodically, his footsteps echoing as he traced the perimeter and tested the acoustics with soft vocalizations. The room had good natural light, multiple exit points if anyone needed a break, and a smaller adjacent room that could serve as a quiet retreat space. "What do you think, buddy?" Sarah asked, watching Tyler examine the room's features with his characteristic thoroughness. Tyler completed his circuit of the room, then looked up at her with serious eyes. He pointed to a corner near the windows and signed, "Trains here?" "Absolutely! We can set up a whole train display right there." Tyler's face broke into one of his rare, brilliant smiles, the kind that made Sarah's heart feel like it might burst with love and pride. In that moment, she knew they were making the right choice, even as the magnitude of what she was attempting began to settle in. The guest list for what Sarah had started calling Tyler's True Christmas was growing beyond her wildest expectations. Marcus and his family were the first to commit, followed quickly by Jessica and little Danny. Cousin Elena had not only accepted, but volunteered to handle all the decorations, declaring that she wanted to show Tyler what real Christmas spirit looks like. But the responses that surprised Sarah most came from people outside the immediate family. Tyler's occupational therapist, Miss Amanda, asked if she could attend with her partner and their twin daughters. "Tyler talks about family all the time during our sessions," she explained. "I'd love to meet the people who mean so much to him, and I think my girls would love meeting him too." The speech therapist from Tyler's preschool, Mr. David, volunteered to bring his famous homemade bread and his expertise in creating sensory-friendly environments for large groups. "I've worked with hundreds of families over the years. The ones who thrive are the ones who build communities around their children instead of trying to fit their children into unwelcoming spaces." Even their upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who had often helped Tyler find his keys when he dropped them in the hallway, asked if she could contribute a dish to the celebration. "That boy always brighten my day. He see me struggle with grocery, he always ask his mama to help. Good heart deserve good Christmas." As the guest list expanded, so did Sarah's understanding of the community that had formed around Tyler without her fully realizing it. These weren't just people accommodating his differences. They were people who genuinely valued his presence in their lives. But with the growing support came growing pressure and unexpected complications. The first challenge arrived in the form of a phone call from Patricia on December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas. "Sarah, I've heard some disturbing rumors about what you're planning." Patricia's voice carried the controlled anger that Sarah remembered from her teenage years. "People are saying you're trying to split the family, that you're making some kind of statement about Christmas dinner." "I'm making sure Tyler has a Christmas celebration where he's wanted, Mom. That's not splitting the family. That's protecting my son." "You're being dramatic and selfish. Do you realize how this makes me look? People are asking me why my own daughter isn't coming to Christmas dinner. What am I supposed to tell them?" Sarah felt the familiar pull to smooth things over, to apologize and find a compromise that would make everyone comfortable. But then she thought about Tyler's excited planning for their new celebration, the way he'd been practicing introducing himself to the new people who would be there, his careful selection of which trains to bring for the display. "Tell them the truth, Mom. Tell them you decided Tyler was too much work to include." The silence stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if Patricia had hung up. When her mother finally spoke, her voice was ice cold. "I'm trying to preserve this family, Sarah. You're the one tearing it apart." "No, Mom. You tore it apart the moment you decided my son wasn't worth the effort. I'm just refusing to pretend that didn't happen." The call ended abruptly, leaving Sarah shaking, but more resolved than ever. An hour later, her phone buzzed with messages from other family members. Apparently, Patricia had started making calls, positioning herself as the victim of Sarah's unreasonable demands and Tyler's impossible needs. Uncle Roberto left a voicemail that made my blood boil. "You're using that boy to get attention, Sarah. Normal families don't rearrange everything for one child's problems. You need to teach him to adapt instead of expecting the world to adapt to him." But for every message of criticism, Sarah received 2 of support. Her cousin Miguel called from Phoenix to say he was changing his Christmas plans to fly in for Tyler's celebration. "That kid taught me more about trains in one afternoon than I learned in 40 years. If he's not welcome at the family Christmas, then the family Christmas isn't worth attending."
The most unexpected call came from Sarah's former mother-in-law, Tyler's paternal grandmother, Linda Williams. Sarah and Linda had maintained a cordial but distant relationship since the divorce, connected only by their shared love for Tyler. "I heard about the situation through Jessica," Linda said carefully. "I know we haven't been close since the divorce, but Tyler is still my grandson. Would it be appropriate for me to attend your celebration?" Sarah was so surprised she didn't respond immediately. Linda filled the silence. "I know I haven't been as involved as I should have been since the diagnosis. I was scared, honestly. I didn't know how to help, and I was afraid of making things worse. But hearing about what your family did, it made me realize that staying away isn't protecting Tyler, it's abandoning him." The conversation that followed was the most honest Sarah and Linda had ever had. Linda admitted that she'd been overwhelmed by Tyler's needs after his diagnosis, unsure how to connect with a grandchild who communicated differently and needed accommodations she didn't understand. But she'd been learning, reading books about autism and following autism advocates on social media. "I want to be better," Linda said. "I want to be the grandmother Tyler deserves, if you'll let me." By December 23rd, the celebration had grown to include nearly 30 people, a mix of family, friends, Tyler's support team, and neighbors. Sarah had never organized anything larger than a birthday party, and the logistics were becoming overwhelming. The community center's kitchen was basic, the tables and chairs were mismatched, and Sarah was starting to panic about everything from food allergies to sensory accommodations for a group this diverse. That's when Dr. Santos arrived with a team of volunteers from the Autism Advocacy Organization. They brought professional-grade sound dampening materials, adjustable lighting, and years of experience creating inclusive events. "We've done this before," Dr. Santos assured Sarah as they transformed the community center's harsh fluorescent environment into something warm and welcoming. "The key is designing for the most sensitive person in the room. If Tyler is comfortable, everyone else will be too." But even with professional help, new challenges kept emerging. Sarah discovered that 2 of Tyler's cousins were bringing friends who had never met an autistic child before. One of the therapy team members was bringing her elderly parents who had old-fashioned ideas about childhood behavior. The neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was planning to bring her adult son who had intellectual disabilities of his own and might need accommodations that Sarah hadn't considered. Each new wrinkle in the planning process felt like a test of Sarah's commitment to true inclusion. It would have been easier to keep the celebration small and predictable, limited to people who already understood Tyler's needs. But every time Sarah considered scaling back, she thought about the message that would send, that inclusion was only possible within carefully controlled parameters. The real test came on December 24th, Christmas Eve, when Tyler had what his therapists called a regulation challenge, a meltdown triggered by the excitement and changes in routine leading up to their new celebration. He'd been asking increasingly anxious questions about who would be there, what the food would be like, and whether the new place would be too loud. The uncertainty, combined with the disruption to his usual pre-Christmas routines, finally overwhelmed his coping systems. Sarah found herself on the floor of Tyler's bedroom at 8 p.m. on Christmas Eve, holding her sobbing son while he rocked and signed his distress over and over. "Too different, too many people, want Grandma's house." In that moment, Sarah questioned everything. Maybe Patricia was right. Maybe Tyler really was better served by smaller, more predictable gatherings. Maybe Sarah was pushing him beyond his comfort zone for her own need to prove a point about inclusion and acceptance. But as Tyler gradually calmed down, nestled against Sarah's chest in the quiet of his room, she realized something important. Tyler wasn't upset about the celebration itself. He was upset about the loss of familiar routines and the uncertainty about whether he would be safe and accepted in this new environment. "Hey, buddy," Sarah said softly, stroking his hair. "Do you remember what makes you feel safe at new places?" Tyler thought for a moment, then signed, "You. Always you." "That's right.
I'll be right there with you tomorrow, and everyone who's coming is coming because they love you and want to celebrate with you, not because they have to, but because they want to." Tyler looked up at her with his serious hazel eyes. Like choosing family? Sarah's breath caught. Tyler had somehow grasped the essence of what they were creating, a chosen family built on love and acceptance, rather than obligation and blood relation. Exactly like choosing family. We're choosing people who choose us back. Tyler nodded slowly, then surprised Sarah with one of his matter-of-fact observations. Grandma didn't choose us. The simple truth of it was devastating and liberating at the same time. Patricia had made her choice, and it hadn't included Tyler. Now, Sarah and Tyler were making their own choice, building their own version of Christmas that put Tyler at the center instead of the margins. As Sarah tucked Tyler back into bed, he signed one final question. "Tomorrow still Christmas?" "Tomorrow is the most Christmas we've ever had," Sarah promised, and for the first time since this whole journey began, she truly believed it.
Christmas morning arrived gray and drizzling, with the kind of persistent Colorado winter weather that seemed to seep through windows and dampen spirits. Sarah woke at 5 a.m. to the sound of Tyler having another meltdown in his room, the third one since midnight. The excitement and anxiety of the approaching celebration had completely disrupted his sleep cycle, and now he was overstimulated, exhausted, and cycling through emotions faster than Sarah could help him process. As she sat on Tyler's bedroom floor, helping him through deep breathing exercises while he rocked and clutched his favorite weighted blanket, Sarah's phone began buzzing with a series of messages that would turn their carefully planned Christmas into a disaster. The first text came from Marcus at 5:47 a.m. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. Sophia woke up with a high fever, and we can't risk exposing Tyler and the other kids. We won't be able to make it today." Then Jessica, "Danny's been throwing up all night. Stomach bug. We're devastated to miss this, but we can't come." Sarah stared at the messages, feeling a cold dread settle in her stomach. Two of her core support systems, the family members who had been most excited about Tyler's celebration, were suddenly unavailable. But worse was yet to come. At 6:15 a.m., Elena called, her voice thick with tears. "Sarah, I don't know how to tell you this. My mom found out about the celebration, and she's threatening to cut off contact with me if I attend. She says I'm choosing you over family, and that if I go, I'm not welcome at any future family events." Elena's mother was Patricia's sister, and apparently the pressure campaign against Sarah had intensified overnight. She told me that Patricia is heartbroken and feels like the whole family is abandoning her for Christmas. She made it sound like you forced everyone to choose sides. The next blow came from an unexpected source. Tyler's occupational therapist, Miss Amanda, called at 7 a.m. with news that shattered Sarah's careful plans. "Sarah, I just got a call from my supervisor. Apparently, someone contacted our clinic's administration yesterday and raised concerns about professional boundaries. They said I was getting inappropriately involved in a client's personal life by attending a family event." Amanda's voice was strained with frustration. "I've been placed on administrative review pending an investigation. I can't attend any client-related activities until it's resolved." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Someone reported you? Who would do that?" The complaint was anonymous, but it specifically mentioned Tyler's autism diagnosis and claimed that I was overstepping ethical guidelines. "Sarah, in 12 years of practice, I've never had a complaint like this. Someone who knows our professional relationship deliberately sabotaged this." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Someone in her family, someone with enough knowledge of Tyler's therapy team to know Amanda's full name and clinic affiliation, had weaponized the professional ethics system to isolate Tyler from his support network. By 8 a.m., the cancellations were cascading. Mr. David, the speech therapist, received a similar call about professional boundaries.
3 of the autism advocacy volunteers had family emergencies that felt suspiciously coincidental. Even Mrs. Chen knocked on Sarah's door with apologetic tears, explaining that her son had received threatening phone calls during the night from someone claiming that autism people weren't welcome in their neighborhood. Sarah found herself sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by grocery bags full of food for 30 people, staring at a guest list that had shrunk from a celebration to what looked like a disaster. Tyler, finally calm after his morning meltdown, was carefully arranging his trays on the coffee table, completely unaware that his Christmas celebration was falling apart around him. The breaking point came when Linda Williams called at 9 a.m. "Sarah, I need to tell you something, and you're gonna hate me for it." Linda's voice was shaking. "My ex-husband called me last night. Tyler's father. He's threatening to petition for custody modification if I attend your celebration today." Sarah's world tilted. "What? Brad hasn't seen Tyler in 8 months. He has no legal standing to. He says he has documentation that you're creating an unstable environment for Tyler, that you're using his autism to manipulate people and create drama. He claims he has witnesses who will testify that Tyler would be better off in a more normal family setting." The custody threat was the cruelest blow yet. Brad had shown minimal interest in Tyler since the divorce, paying his court-ordered child support but rarely exercising his visitation rights. He'd made it clear that Tyler's autism made him uncomfortable, and he'd started a new family with a woman who had normal children. For him to suddenly emerge as a concerned parent felt like pure malice. "Linda, you know that's not true. You know Tyler is thriving with me." "Of course I know that, but Linda, I can't risk giving him any ammunition to use against you. If something happened to Tyler's placement with you because I attended the celebration," Linda's voice broke, "I could never forgive myself."
After Linda hung up, Sarah sat in her kitchen and counted the people still planning to attend Tyler's celebration. Herself, Tyler, cousin Miguel, who was flying in from Phoenix, and possibly 2 neighbors who might not even show up. The community center was paid for, the decorations were ready, and Tyler was excited about his special Christmas. But the celebration had been systematically dismantled by people who claimed to love them. The psychological warfare was more sophisticated than Sarah had given her family credit for. They hadn't just discouraged attendance, they'd found ways to make participation professionally and personally dangerous for Tyler's support network. Anonymous complaints to licensing boards, custody threats, family ultimatums, and what sounded like intimidation tactics against vulnerable community members. Sarah realized she was dealing with people who were willing to destroy Tyler's entire support system rather than examine their own prejudices about autism and inclusion. At 10 a.m., Tyler approached her with his communication tablet, carefully typing out a message. "Time to go to Christmas party?" Sarah looked at her beautiful, trusting son, who had no idea that the celebration he'd been anticipating had been sabotaged by the very people who were supposed to love him unconditionally. She had 2 choices: lie to him about why they weren't going, or take him to a mostly empty community center for what would feel like a public demonstration of their isolation. "Buddy, there's been some changes to our Christmas plans," she began carefully. Tyler's expression immediately shifted to concern. He signed, "People sick? Like Sophia and Danny?" "Some people are sick, yes, and some people had other things come up. It might be a smaller celebration than we planned." Tyler processed this information with his usual seriousness, then asked the question that broke Sarah's heart. "Nobody wants to come to Tyler's Christmas?" The simple, direct question forced Sarah to confront the reality of what had happened. Her family hadn't just excluded Tyler from their celebration, they'd actively worked to ensure he couldn't create an alternative celebration either. They'd turned Christmas Day into a demonstration of Tyler's isolation rather than his belonging. "That's not true, buddy. The people who really love us will be there." But even as she said it, she wondered if it was true.
Miguel was still coming, but he was one person flying across the country to attend what was now essentially a play date in a rented community center. Was she putting Tyler through an elaborate charade to avoid admitting that her family had won? Tyler seemed to sense her distress because he climbed into her lap and signed, "Mama sad?" Sarah held him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his strawberry shampoo and feeling the solid warmth of his small body against hers. In that moment, she had to make a choice that would define both of their futures. She could call off the celebration, return to the pattern of accepting whatever scraps of inclusion her family was willing to offer, and teach Tyler that sometimes the people you love will let you down, and there's nothing you can do about it. Or she could take him to that community center, set up their decorations, arrange his train display, and show him that sometimes standing up for what's right means standing alone, but that standing alone with dignity is better than belonging on someone else's cruel terms. Tyler pulled back to look at her face, studying her expression with the intensity he usually reserved for his train schedules. Then he signed something that surprised her. "We still choose family? Even small family?" Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. Tyler understood more than she had given him credit for. He grasped that today wasn't about the size of the celebration or the number of people who attended. It was about the quality of love and acceptance they created together. "Yes, buddy, we still choose family, even if it's small." Tyler nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Small family still real family?" "The realest family there is." As Sarah helped Tyler gather his carefully selected items for the celebration, his train ornament, his favorite sensory toys, and the Christmas cards he'd made for everyone who was supposed to attend, she made a quiet promise to herself and to him. Today would not be about what they'd lost. Today would be about what they were building. Even if they were building it from scratch, even if they were building it almost alone, and even if the people who should have been there had chosen cruelty over love. Tyler deserved a Christmas celebration, and Sarah was going to give him one, even if it killed her, even if it meant admitting that her biological family had failed them both, even if it meant starting completely over with the painful knowledge that love isn't always enough to overcome prejudice and fear. The community center was waiting. Miguel would be there, and maybe, just maybe, Tyler's Christmas would still be magical in ways that had nothing to do with crowd size and everything to do with the courage to celebrate in the face of rejection. As they prepared to leave their apartment, Tyler signed one final question. "After Christmas, still choose each other?" "Always," Sarah promised. "We always choose each other." It was the only thing that felt completely true.
The community center looked like a ghost town when Sarah and Tyler arrived at 11 a.m. The decorations that Elena had so carefully planned were still in boxes in Sarah's car. The sound dampening materials provided by Dr. Santos sat unused in their packages, and the 30 place settings Sarah had arranged the night before seemed to mock the reality of their situation. But Tyler didn't see failure when he walked into that empty space. He saw possibility. "Mama? Train corner?" he signed, pointing to the sunny spot by the windows where they had planned his display. Sarah watched in amazement as Tyler began methodically unpacking his train collection, arranging each piece with the same careful attention he gave to this ritual at home. He wasn't disappointed by the absence of a crowd. He was focused on creating something beautiful in the space they had. Following Tyler's lead, Sarah began setting up the sensory-friendly lighting Dr. Santos had provided. As she worked, she found herself thinking about the events of the morning differently. Yes, her family had orchestrated a cruel campaign to isolate Tyler, but their tactics had also revealed something important. They were afraid of what Sarah and Tyler were building. The systematic nature of the sabotage meant that Patricia and her allies saw Tyler's alternative celebration as a genuine threat to their narrative about autism and family inclusion. If they hadn't been worried about the message Sarah was sending, they wouldn't have worked so hard to prevent it from happening. At 11:30, Miguel arrived from the airport, and his presence immediately transformed the energy in the room. He was a big man with calloused hands and an easy laugh, wearing a Denver Broncos sweatshirt and carrying a duffel bag that clanked mysteriously when he set it down. "There's my favorite conductor," he called out when he saw Tyler's train display. Tyler's face lit up in a way Sarah hadn't seen all morning. He ran to Miguel and signed rapidly, "Cousin Miguel, you came! You really came!" Miguel had been learning sign language since Tyler's diagnosis, motivated by genuine affection for his young cousin. His signing was clumsy, but enthusiastic as he responded, "Always come for Tyler Christmas. You show trains?" For the next hour, Sarah watched Miguel and Tyler create magic in that mostly empty room. Miguel unpacked his mysterious duffel bag to reveal a collection of vintage model trains he'd been collecting for years, gifts intended for Tyler that he'd been saving for the right moment. Tyler was in heaven, carefully examining each piece and explaining the history and specifications with the expertise that never failed to amaze adults. But the real transformation began when Mrs. Chen arrived at 12:30, despite the threats her son had received. She brought not only her promised dish, an elaborate Chinese feast that could have fed 50 people, but also her son, David, a gentleman in his 30s with Down syndrome, who immediately gravitated toward Tyler's train display. "David loves trains too," Mrs. Chen explained to Sarah. "At home, he has model subway from Beijing. Maybe boys can be friends." Sarah watched David and Tyler begin a wordless communication about train organization, each understanding the other's need for precise arrangement and systematic categorization. David's intellectual disability and Tyler's autism created no barriers between them. Instead, they found common ground in their shared attention to detail and love of transportation systems. At 1, just as Sarah was beginning to believe their small gathering might actually work, an unexpected guest arrived. Dr. Rebecca Santos, carrying a box of emergency supplies and looking like she was ready for battle. "I heard about what happened to Amanda and David. Anonymous ethics complaints filed on Christmas Eve? Someone's playing dirty, and I don't tolerate that kind of discrimination against my colleagues or the families we serve." Dr. Santos had brought more than just professional outrage. She'd brought documentation. "I spent the morning making some calls. The ethics complaints against your therapy team all came from the same phone number, registered to a Patricia Martinez in Colorado Springs. The allegations are so vague, they're essentially frivolous, but they're designed to create exactly the situation you're facing today." Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and heartbreak. Having proof of her mother's deliberate sabotage was satisfying, but it also made the betrayal more concrete and painful. "What can we do about it?" Sarah asked. "Well, first, I've already contacted the licensing boards involved. When ethics complaints are filed maliciously to interfere with the family support services, that's actually a form of harassment that can have legal consequences. Patricia may find herself dealing with some unwanted attention." But Dr. Santos had brought more than just legal strategy. She'd brought perspective. "Sarah, what happened today isn't a setback. It's intelligence gathering. You now know exactly who your allies are and exactly what tactics your opponents are willing to use. That's valuable information for building something stronger." As Dr. Santos spoke, Sarah began to see the morning's disasters differently. The people who had canceled due to illness were genuinely sick. Marcus had sent photos of Sophia's fever, and Jessica had been texting updates about Danny's recovery all morning. The people who had been intimidated or threatened had revealed which relationships could be weaponized against Tyler's support network.
But the people who had shown up, Miguel flying across the country, Mrs. Chen defying threats, Dr. Santos arriving with professional backup, had demonstrated something more powerful than fair weather support. They had demonstrated commitment that couldn't be shaken by pressure campaigns or social consequences. At 2 p.m., Tyler made an announcement that surprised everyone. Using his communication tablet, he typed out a message and showed it to the group. "Tyler's Christmas perfect. Small family, big love."
The simplicity and wisdom of his observation hit Sarah like a revelation. Tyler wasn't disappointed by the reduced guest list or the attacks on their celebration. He was delighted by the quality of connection he was experiencing with the people who had chosen to be there. Watching Tyler explain train engineering to David while Miguel asked thoughtful questions and Mrs. Chen provided running translation, Sarah realized they hadn't failed to create an inclusive celebration. They had succeeded in creating something better. They had created a celebration where every person present genuinely wanted to be there, where Tyler's autism wasn't being tolerated but celebrated, where difference was seen as interesting rather than burdensome. Dr. Santos pulled Sarah aside during Tyler's train presentation. "I want to propose something to you. What if this isn't the end of Tyler's Christmas celebration? What if it's the beginning of something bigger?" She outlined a plan that took Sarah's breath away. The Autism Advocacy Organization had been looking for families willing to share their stories publicly, to challenge misconceptions about autism and family inclusion. Sarah's experience, both the exclusion and the alternative celebration, represented exactly the kind of narrative that could help other families facing similar situations. We're talking about a documentary project, speaking engagements at conferences, maybe even legislative testimony about discrimination against families with disabled children. Your story has power, Sarah. The question is whether you're ready to use it. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Sarah had spent years trying to fly under the radar, to make Tyler's needs as invisible as possible, to avoid exactly the kind of conflict she was now experiencing. The thought of going public with their story felt like stepping into a spotlight that could expose them to even more criticism and judgment. But as she watched Tyler confidently leading his new friend David through the intricacies of model train operation, Sarah realized that hiding hadn't protected them anyway. Her family had found ways to hurt Tyler even when she was being accommodating and diplomatic. Maybe it was time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. At 3 p.m., Miguel suggested they start documenting their celebration. "This is historic," he said, pulling out his phone. "Tyler's first chosen family Christmas. We should record it." What followed was an impromptu video session that captured something magical. Tyler explaining his train collection with the passion of a museum curator, David demonstrating his Beijing subway model with pride and precision, Mrs. Chen teaching everyone how to use chopsticks while sharing stories about Christmas celebrations in different cultures, Miguel interviewing Tyler about what family means to him. The videos weren't professional, but they were authentic in a way that made Sarah's chest tight with emotion. This was Tyler in his element, surrounded by people who saw his autism as just one interesting aspect of who he was. This was what inclusion actually looked like when it was built from love rather than obligation. At 4 p.m., Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She opened her laptop and began typing a social media post that would eventually be shared hundreds of thousands of times. "This morning, my 4-year-old autistic son was excluded from our family Christmas because he was deemed too much work. Instead of accepting that exclusion, we created our own celebration. What we discovered is that a small group of people who truly choose to love Tyler is infinitely more valuable than a large group of people who tolerate him. This is what real family looks like." She attached the videos Miguel had taken, showing Tyler's joy and confidence in his alternative celebration. She tagged the Autism Advocacy Organization, her supportive family members, and used hashtags that would connect their story to the broader autism community. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, the post had hundreds of comments from other autism families sharing their own experiences with exclusion and alternative celebrations. Parents, siblings, and autistic adults themselves reached out with support, advice, and stories of their own journeys toward chosen family. But the comment that meant the most came from Tyler himself, dictated to Miguel while Sarah was reading responses. "Tyler wants to help other kids like Tyler. Tyler wants to show families how to love better."
Sarah looked at her son, who had somehow transformed from the victim of family rejection into an advocate for his own community, and realized that their crisis had become their calling. Tyler's exclusion from Christmas dinner had sparked something bigger than a holiday celebration. It had sparked a movement toward authentic inclusion and chosen family. The community center might have been mostly empty that morning, but by evening it felt like the center of something revolutionary. Not because they had created the perfect inclusive celebration, but because they had created something real, something honest, and something that other families could build upon. Tyler's Christmas had become exactly what he said it was, perfect, not because it went according to plan, but because it revealed what they were actually fighting for, not tolerance, but celebration, not accommodation, but genuine welcome. Not family by blood, but family by choice. The real work was just beginning.
6 months after Tyler's alternative Christmas celebration, Sarah stood outside the Colorado State Capitol building, holding Tyler's hand as they prepared to enter the most important meeting of their lives. The marble steps seemed impossibly tall, and the weight of what they were about to do pressed down on Sarah's shoulders like a physical force. Tyler looked up at the imposing government building with his characteristic calm assessment, then signed, "Big, important place?" "Very big, very important," Sarah confirmed. "Remember what we practiced? You're going to tell the legislators about families and inclusion." Tyler nodded seriously, adjusting the small backpack that contained his communication tablet, noise-canceling headphones, and his lucky train, a vintage locomotive that Miguel had given him at Christmas. Over the past 6 months, Tyler had become an unlikely but powerful advocate for autism inclusion, speaking at community events and appearing in the documentary that Dr. Santos had helped produce. But today was different. Today, Tyler would be addressing the Colorado State Legislature's Committee on Disabilities and Family Services, providing testimony in support of House Bill 247, legislation that would make family exclusion based on disability status a form of actionable discrimination. The bill had emerged directly from Sarah's viral social media post about Tyler's Christmas exclusion. The story had been picked up by local news, the national outlets, and eventually caught the attention of State Representative Maria Gonzalez, herself the mother of a child with special needs. Representative Gonzalez had worked with advocacy organizations to draft legislation that would give families legal recourse when they face discrimination in housing, employment, education, or family situations based on a family member's disability. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of interviews, speaking engagements, and legal preparation. Sarah had testified before school boards about inclusive education, spoken at autism conferences about family dynamics, and worked with lawyers to document the systematic campaign her own family had waged against Tyler's inclusion. The documentation Dr. Santos had gathered proved invaluable. Patricia's anonymous ethics complaints had been traced and exposed, resulting in official reprimands for filing false reports. Uncle Roberto's recorded voicemails threatening Sarah with custody challenges had become evidence of harassment. The coordinated family pressure campaign that had targeted Tyler's Christmas celebration had been thoroughly documented and would serve as a case study in how disability discrimination operates within families. But the personal cost had been enormous. Sarah's relationship with her mother remained completely severed. Patricia had doubled down on her position, claiming in interviews with local media that she was the real victim, a grandmother being unfairly maligned for setting reasonable boundaries around a difficult child. The extended family had fractured along predictable lines. Marcus and Jessica remained firmly in Sarah's corner, as did Miguel and several cousins. But Uncle Roberto, Aunt Carol, and about half of the Martinez clan had rallied around Patricia, creating competing narratives about Tyler's needs and Sarah's motivations. The most painful betrayal had come from Tyler's father, Brad, who had followed through on his custody modification petition. For 3 months, Sarah had lived in terror that Tyler might be removed from her care and placed with a father who had never understood or accepted his autism. The legal battle had been vicious, with Brad's lawyers arguing that Sarah's confrontational advocacy was creating an unstable environment for Tyler.
In the end, the custody challenge had backfired spectacularly. Tyler's team of therapists, teachers, and medical professionals had provided overwhelming testimony about his progress and well-being in Sarah's care. More importantly, Tyler himself had been interviewed by the family court judge, a conversation that had apparently left no doubt about where Tyler belonged. The child demonstrated remarkable self-advocacy skills and a clear understanding of his own needs, the judge had written in her ruling dismissing Brad's petition. His bond with his mother is evident, and his progress under her care is exemplary. This court finds no evidence that advocacy for a child's inclusion rights constitutes instability. But Tyler's own words to the judge had sealed the decision. When asked about his living situation, Tyler had used his communication tablet to type, "Mama fights for Tyler. Mama makes world safer for Tyler. Tyler safe with Mama." Now, as they climbed the Capitol steps, Sarah reflected on how much both of them had changed since that devastating text message on December 20th. Tyler had evolved from a shy 4-year-old who needed constant protection into a confident 5-year-old who could advocate for himself and others. His communication skills had exploded, partly due to intensive therapy, but mostly due to being in environments where his voice was valued and heard. Sarah had transformed from a conflict-avoided peacekeeper into a fierce advocate who understood that some fights were worth having. She had learned the difference between accommodation and inclusion, between tolerance and acceptance, between keeping the peace and creating justice. The hearing room was packed with families, disability advocates, and legislators. Sarah spotted Dr. Santos in the gallery, along with Amanda and David, Tyler's therapists who had been cleared of all ethics violations and had become vocal supporters of the legislation. Miguel had flown in from Phoenix again, and even Mrs. Chan was there with David, who had become one of Tyler's closest friends. But the presence that surprised Sarah most was Linda Williams, Tyler's paternal grandmother. After the custody battle had ended, Linda had reached out with a profound apology and a request to rebuild her relationship with Tyler. She had spent months in family therapy, learning about autism and working through her own fears and misconceptions. "I lost 2 years with my grandson because I was afraid of his differences," Linda had told Sarah during one of their carefully structured reunification meetings. "I won't lose any more time because of ignorance." Representative Gonzalez called the hearing to order and introduced Tyler as the youngest person ever to provide testimony to the committee. Sarah helped Tyler connect his communication tablet to the room's speaker system, an accommodation that had been arranged in advance. Tyler stood at the witness table, his small figure dwarfed by the formal setting, but his presence somehow commanding the room's attention. He looked out at the assembled legislators with his characteristic calm assessment, then began to speak through his tablet's voice output system. "My name is Tyler Williams. I am 5 years old and I have autism. Last Christmas, my family said I was too much work to come to dinner. My mama didn't accept that. She made a new Christmas where people chose to love me." The room was completely silent except for Tyler's synthetic voice continuing his prepared testimony.
Some families think autism is scary or too hard, but autism is just how my brain works. I see patterns and details that other people miss. I love trains because they follow rules and schedules, like my thoughts do. I need quiet spaces sometimes because the world is very loud for me. These things are not problems. They are just Tyler things. Sarah watched the legislators' faces as Tyler continued, seeing some of them lean forward with interest, others looking moved by his straightforward explanation of his experience. When families exclude people with disabilities, they miss out on the good parts of us. My friend David has Down syndrome, and he knows everything about subway systems. My friend Luna has ADHD, and she notices things in nature that help scientists. My friend Marcus is deaf, and he can have conversations in loud rooms that hearing people can't follow. Tyler paused to take a drink of water, a self-advocacy skill he had mastered over the months of public speaking. House Bill 247 is important because families should not be allowed to throw away members just because they are different. If a family excludes someone for being Black or gay or Jewish, that would be discrimination. Excluding someone for having autism or Down syndrome or being deaf should also be discrimination. The gallery erupted in quiet murmurs of agreement. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes as she watched her son articulate concepts that many adults struggled to understand. My mama taught me that we get to choose our family. We choose people who see the good parts of our differences instead of just the hard parts. But we shouldn't have to choose. Real families figure out how to include everyone. Tyler's final statement brought several legislators to tears and prompted spontaneous applause from the gallery. Tyler, thank you for that powerful testimony. Can you tell us what you want other families to learn from your experience? Tyler thought for a moment, then typed his response. Love is not supposed to be conditional. If you love someone, you figure out how to make them feel welcome. You don't make them smaller to fit into your space. You make your space bigger to fit their wholeness. Sarah felt her heart swell with pride and amazement. Tyler had articulated the central truth that had taken her months to understand, that real inclusion wasn't about making disabled people fit into existing systems, but about expanding those systems to celebrate human diversity. After Tyler's testimony, Sarah provided supporting evidence about the discrimination they had faced and the broader patterns that other families had experienced. But it was clear that Tyler's words had already won the room. The bill passed committee unanimously and was signed into law 3 months later, becoming the first legislation in the country to explicitly address family-based disability discrimination. It became known informally as Tyler Law and served as a model for similar legislation in other states. But the real victory wasn't legislative. It was personal. Tyler had found his voice and his purpose. Sarah had found her strength and her calling. And together, they had created a chosen family that stretched across the country, connected by the understanding that love should expand to meet people where they are, not demand that people shrink to fit into narrow definitions of acceptability. A year after that original devastating text message, Sarah received a very different kind of message. This one from a mother in Oregon whose autistic daughter had been excluded from a family wedding. I saw Tyler's testimony online, the message read. My daughter and I are planning our own celebration where she'll be the guest of honor instead of the unwanted burden. Thank you for showing us that we don't have to accept exclusion just because it comes from family. Sarah showed the message to Tyler, who smiled his brilliant smile and signed, We helped? We helped, Sarah confirmed, and we're just getting started. Tyler nodded with satisfaction, then returned to arranging his trains, not because he was obsessed or disruptive, but because bringing order to his small corner of the world brought him joy. And in a world that too often demanded conformity over authenticity, Tyler's joy had become an act of revolution. The boy who had once been deemed too much work had become a catalyst for families everywhere to examine what they truly valued, the comfort of sameness or the richness of inclusion. Tyler had taught them all that the choice was always theirs to make. He had also taught them that some children are worth changing the world for. And some children, when given the chance, will change the world themselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.